Jordan, good to talk to you again.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
We have gone now from just political gotcha games to this claim by Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi that the investigation into Operation Fast and Furious, it's really a Republican plan, a nationwide scheme to suppress the vote. I'm sure you heard what Congressman Gowdy had to say, but he said, this is mind-numbingly stupid what she had to say. Your reaction when you heard this latest claim by the Democrats?
Well, Nancy Pelosi has been all over the place on this. I mean, first say, she could have arrested Karl Rove. And the truth was, if she had a House resolution saying you can arrest Karl Rove if he's on the premises to force him to testify, there's an arcane rule that hasn't been used by 1930. But big problem with that statement, saying she could have arrested Karl Rove for lots of different things, was there was no resolution authorizing her to do that. That's part one. And part two, what does this have to do about voter suppression? This is not about voter ID, unless she's confusing it in her head which issue this is about. Eric Holder attacking and going after our constitutional rights, because there's the voter ID issues, but this has to do with, of course, a congressional investigation. And I would say it this way, if this is how Nancy Pelosi views it, they must be scared about what's inside here. I mean, they must realize that as much as they'll say over and over when it comes to this, you're distracting from the bigger issues like the economy, that they know that this is having an impact. And it's having an impact only because of this stalemating. If Eric Holder a long time ago would have just come out and said, bad policy, got people, out the door who were handling this, we apologize, we're not going to let this happen again, it's a problem, and we admit that. Yeah. This would not be a scandal anymore. But instead, they tried to say they had nothing to do with it. They created this mess. And for Nancy Pelosi and others to try to act as if this is just a bunch of Republicans, this is because they sent a letter in February of 2011 that had inaccurate information in it and then withdrew that letter 10 months later. If you and I did that, we'd probably be in jail right now. At least we'd be indicted and going through an investigation.
But Holder was held in contempt because we have a dead Border Patrol agent. We have thousands of guns that are now in the hands of Mexican criminals. And the AG himself has said, you know what, we're going to pay the price for this for a long time. But no, they don't want to know about that. They just want to push for more gun laws. And as Wayne LaPierre said yesterday on CNN, this is what this is about. And the fact that they're trying to hide these documents is even more proof that this is really what this was about.
Yeah, and I think that hits it, too, what people are saying on TV, and they haven't gotten into it as much detail, but that there's some reason why the President of the United States, who has not been so tarnished by Fast and Furious, the worst thing about this is people saying, why would you keep this AG around? But it's not what hasn't been about Obama. The bigger issue is how far up the chain does it go now inside the White House when you're talking about, like you just said, the gun policy issues. How do we spin this? How do we use this? How involved is David Axelrod, the campaign, the anti-gun crowd? You start realizing that there may be enough information in there, and of course they're making us play this guessing game because when you invoke executive privilege in the 11th hour, there's something there that's worth, I think, tarnishing President Obama's record on transparency and saying he doesn't like all that. He issues his first executive order months before a general election, and on an issue that, for the most part, we have been told he had barely, nothing to do with, and not many people in the White House did, except for the communication aspect. And so, again, you wonder how bad is it that a president who doesn't like executive orders or executive privilege and all these issues would actually go this far right before an election. It must be a balancing call that they'd rather delay this and take the blame and take the anger they're getting and then hope that it goes away.
But the White House, they keep saying, and there was Jay Carney again yesterday talking about political theater, and he said, hey, you know what? President Bush used executive privilege, President Clinton, President Reagan. But I got to ask you, it's not that Obama's using it. It's how he's using it because he's trying to cover something up, isn't he?
You're exactly right. I was on Fox News yesterday with a Democrat who, a tough guy. He's a smart guy, so they use those statistics. But finally, I just said enough. The court in each of those instances didn't say, oh, well, President Bush, President Clinton did 14 times. So on your fourth time, we're just going to give you a pass. It's absolute. We're not going to look into it. You get executive privilege. That's never the case. Just because you claim it 14 times, if this was his 20th time, the 19 times could have been fine. But this may have been, and there's a lot of agreement, especially in the conservative world, that executive privilege is important when you're making in the deliberation process of a president of the United States. But when you create a scandal, which is what the Department of Justice did, after someone's killed, and you don't just come out and tell the truth. Listen, the kind of executive privilege they claim here is still, we don't believe, at the presidential communication level. It's a subsidiary level called a deliberative process. And most of the time, if you're really talking about deliberation, if you're talking about people trying to advise the Attorney General about how he delivers his remarks, listen, you can claim those privileges, but it's a much easier bar to overcome. All you have to prove in court is that the information you're seeking, which has been whittled down now to about 400 or so pages, not as much as what was originally necessary or requested by the committee, if it will shed light on misconduct, not criminality. Criminality is the standard for the presidential communications privilege. For this privilege, will it shed light on misconduct within the government, which, of course, the Congress funds. Congress raises revenue to fund the executive branch. That's why they have this oversight power. So, the talking points of President Bush, a good example with President Bush is he exerted executive privilege for Harriet Miers. They didn't win in court. Eventually, they settled. So it didn't go through the full court process, but eventually she testified behind a closed-door session. Same thing goes for Karl Rove after he got held in contempt. So it's not as if pointing to the numbers of when a president executed or exerted his executive privilege and then had it ended up they lost or they had to settle out of court because they were about to lose in court. So listen, I mean, you could go back and forth at examples, but the truth is, just because you assert it once, the court's not going to say, "Oh, this is the only time you've done it." This is just all talking points. They got nothing else to say. They know it was botched. I mean, even if you are a believer in President Obama and you like Eric Holder, you have to know they screwed up on this one, especially Eric Holder.
Well, how about, I don't know if you had a chance to see this, but White House Press Secretary Jay Carney, he actually forgot the name of the Terry family yesterday. He forgot the name of this family. I mean, how much more shameful can you get? We're talking about a family who keeps saying, all we want is the truth. Now they're saying, release the documents. But they forgot they don't even like to say the name of Brian Terry, but now they forgot it.
Yeah, I think what it shows you right there is that the White House press secretary, when he's prepping, and like when I know I'm going to talk to you, I've been looking at Fast and Furious info. You keep yourself refreshed. That's what you do when you do interviews. That's what his job is to do. And he knew he was going to get questioned on Fast and Furious. I think the bigger issue is he forgot the name because it's not that important to them.
Yeah,
this is not that
true.
important of an issue. And they've been trying. This is their hope and their goal. Even letting Holder go through a contempt process, and unless something changes, which it could by next week, I mean, they could technically release these documents, privately to the committee, and maybe they'll save some face. But I think what the truth is, what's going on here, is if they can get it to be R's versus D's, Republicans versus Democrats, and if you notice, the vote was party line in the committee on contempt, and they take it to the House floor, and it's basically, give or take a few on either side, party line, they'll just get up and say, they're trying to make Fast and Furious, which is something we stopped, a partisan issue. This is just to hurt the president, attack the president. Same stuff that Nancy Pelosi said. This is trying to discredit the president of the United States and his administration. That's, the issue is not about that at all. It's just about the fact that if anybody else submitted a letter like that to Congress, and then 10 months later, after their deliberative process of going through the real information.
When they realized they couldn't get away with it,
Right. And you know what they could have said? They could have said 10 months ago, we don't know.
Yep.
If they would have said, we don't know, we've got to investigate it, and then come out those, 10 months later or even sooner maybe, since they weren't going to have to figure out how to spin it, and say, you know what, there was indication and we did shut it down, and this thing would have been over much quicker than now. But they came out, rushed answers, and sometimes I feel bad for Eric Holder, honestly, because he's sitting up there, and obviously no one's prepped him. No one knows what to say to these questions, and it's pretty amazing of all these Harvard-educated lawyers and Yale graduates who are advising him who can't figure out how to get through congressional questioning and even answer the most basic of basic questions. Every time he answers, I feel like that's going to get him in trouble. That's going to get him in trouble. Like he says, the White House, he's had no communication with the White House. Well, if other people, Department of Justice, well, some, maybe, I don't know. And then, it comes out that he did know and that he was in a meeting about it there. So the list goes on. I just think we have to be very cautious, and we also have to be in tune with the public to make sure we're able to explain, like we have today. We don't want to make it about Nancy Pelosi. We want to make it about it's Brian Terry, and that's why this investigation even started, there was a whistleblower at the ATF who saw a press conference where a U.S. attorney was saying how great Fast and Furious was, and they made all these low-level, 40 or so low-level arrests, and then he was asked about gun walking. He denied it at that press conference. This is after Brian Terry was killed, and someone inside the ATF finally had enough, got the information to Senator Grassley. That's the reason we have an investigation. If there was no Brian Terry, unfortunately, as bad as this program is, we probably wouldn't be investigating because there wouldn't have been a whistleblower. Well, here there was, and that's what this is about. This is about getting answers. Why did the U.S. Department of Justice not tell the truth from the beginning? And there is a right answer to say, we don't know yet. We've got to check. People could take that at their word. But to start making claims like, oh, no, we got nothing to do with it, it's always the kiss of death in Washington.
All righty, and Jordan, thanks for your input, but there's no question, by Obama inserting himself, he has made this a political issue that even the mainstream media can't ignore. You got NBC leading with this the other night when they weren't even covering it. So, hey, you're right, we got to educate the public, and I don't know if they'll be the ones, but we got to keep talking about it.
Absolutely, and, the president, by getting involved in this and issuing executive privilege decree, basically, we'll see the exacts of that soon. Listen, it's on him now, and I think that's shifted the debate as well. This is now about President Obama himself.